Amigas y amigos, aquí estamos de regreso. Esperamos que este par de conferencias magistrales hayan resultado de provecho para ustedes. Ya se acerca, ya se va a llevar a cabo el primer panel del día. Sus temas, justicia restaurativa y justicia cívica. Los panelistas son Antoine Brosier, director gerente de WAG, una organización de Hannover, Alemania. Violeta Maltos, directora del Instituto Internacional de Justicia Restaurativa y Derecho, y Bernardo León Olea, abogado y consultor en temas de seguridad y justicia penal. La moderadora será Lilian Chapa. Lilian es analista en políticas de seguridad pública con experiencia en México, Honduras y Colombia. Ustedes saben que actualmente es investigadora senior del World Justice Project y editora del blog sobre política de seguridad y justicia de la revista Nexos. Les doy la bienvenida a los cuatro. Continuamos. Gracias.
Gracias, Pablo.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenos días a quienes nos acompañan en este foro.
Hello there, good morning to those of you who have joined us. Welcome to this panel in which we're going to talk about restorative justice and civic justice. With us we have three very important speakers. Bernardo León Olea, who is a lawyer in penal justice affairs. Violeta Matos, who is director of the Restorative Justice and Law Institute in Mexico, and Antoine Brosier, who is the director of WAG Hannover. Well, this aspect is crucial when it comes to innovation. For many of the people who join us from other countries that are not Mexico, maybe this is no innovation per se to you. But it is, however, to us. Especially when it comes to public safety and justice, it is important for us to have three people who have operated within these types of systems in justice in different contexts, very different contexts. And this is why I'm so happy to have them here with us. As a starting point, I would say that it is a bit problematic to me to conceive civil justice and restorative justice as informal aspects of justice, or they're informal systems of justice, but I believe that is not the case. When we talk about this in particular, we in a way are bringing down the potential that it could have, that these tools could have in the future, so that they can actually provide solutions in justice affairs. And now in our society, there's an inclination in having everything that deals with public security and bringing that up to the penal system, and that unfortunately has yet to be fruitful, because our communities are no longer just or fair, and problems have yet to be mitigated. So it is important to explore how these types of tools have worked and how they have been implemented in different contexts, and that in the end they are everything but informal in nature. So Bernardo, if you will, in 10 minutes, please explain how you have implemented civic justice. What is it that it does? And thinking of people that can actually take this or these concepts to any city, municipality, or what have you. How does it work, and what has it worked on? Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Edna, and our organizers. I'm going to share with you a brief presentation to delve into this topic, and I'm going to talk to you from my own experience. First off, I want to say that when we went to Morelia, the city of Morelia, and we started to explore civic justice, and we discovered through polls that at least a third of adults in Mexico had faced had problems with their neighbors, for instance, or people within their communities. In 17 cities that we polled, about 40% had conflicts, and in other cities, about 60%. And one of these cities we worked on was the city of Morelia in the state of Michoacan. And most of the problems or claims they had was, problems with parking, noise, domestic animals, problems with that, things of that nature. And from these problems, about 50% had solved that through dialogue, but about a third of those people had managed to solve it through insults and shouting and doing things that were not correct. So what we had, the only solution that we had with the people, with the police, was to detain or arrest these people, and that they would pay a fine of 35 pesos and they would be free. And in these cases, these 35 pesos were given directly to the officers, or they would spend a 36 hours under arrest. And what happens with these hours of arrest? Well, they just stay there in jail, and then they leave and they go back to their wrongdoings. And that didn't solve the problem, and it generated a lot of corruption in turn. And another aspect of these problems was traffic fines, and it was very problematic to see, like for instance, an officer actually taking the plates off of a car, because in order to force people to pay their fines, so the people who would actually do something wrong in transit, they would the officers would take off their plates, or even in some cases their car. So what would happen? Well, you either had to go pay the 35 pesos or spend in jail, and this is one aspect, or on the other aspect, they would have an administrative punishment, if you will. And what would happen in the end is that you wouldn't solve the big problem. And in a way, it provided a disadvantage to certain groups, because the people who actually had a lot of money would pay the fine, and those who didn't have it or couldn't afford it, they wouldn't. So we actually had a defender's office in the administrative justice departments. So people would come to us, and we would have to give them whatever we took from them, in this case, the plates or what have you, and they would end up not paying their fines. Sometimes in such cases, people wouldn't even go collect their plates, and we had storages, warehouses full of these plates, and so we had to amend things. So we went to Article 21 of the Constitution, who provided from 2018 the possibility of fining people and arresting them temporarily. But we also had public work and public service. And so how could we do it in order to implement restorative processes that would include public service from the people that committed a misdemeanor? So we had to change all sorts of guidelines and rule books that we had, primers even in transit. So everybody would have to be included. We even had about 170 hearings or depositions for, claims such as transit fines, traffic fines, and what have you. So we had to privilege community work, so that people would actually pay their sentence, and we would no longer take plates off. And in the end, we managed to come to a point in which these things would work. If there was no way in which they would have their car sequestered or their plates taken off, then we would force people to pay through community service. And we have to point out that civil justice and restorative justice did not start within the people or the offices. It began within the police officers and the police department. It started with people who would go and lay a claim with the police department, and then the police officers themselves would take these things into their hands and reach an agreement with the people or the offenders. And then that led us to create a new system. So we began building the civil justice offices, and people think that it is expensive to have these types of offices. And we actually began with an abandoned warehouse that had no luxuries in it. It was very simple, very humble. We just adapted it to attend to these types of civil claims and begin a process of governance so that people would actually feel that they were going to an authority, and that authority would, in a peaceful way, solve their claims. And this improved. It actually took traction. It started to take traction, and we worked with a foundation called Renace, and this foundation helped us in not providing us only with a possibility of community service. You know, for instance, if you would have a youth committing a crime, they would do community service through the Renace foundation, but also provided therapy services. We found that some of the youth would have psychological problems. So these foundations would provide even psychological services to them so that they would not be recidivists. And we were so happy with this because everything started to work itself out properly. We saw that prevalence and recidivism would go down, and we went from being the first city with the most cases of neighbor conflict to being one of the ones that had the least. And suddenly, however, we hit a wall. We saw an increase in homicides. So they had decreased substantially, but at some point they grew again. So what we saw was that some people had approached civil justice and had been attendant to the needs in civil justice, but there's also a border in a way that is very that is not so apparent between civil justice and actual law. So we'd have people or women mostly that would come to us so that they would lay a claim on violence, and we realized that that was not in the ballpark of civic justice, and we would send them elsewhere. And at some point, we had the homicide of a woman that we actually had told to go elsewhere. And sometimes we saw people and bodies appearing here and there. That you saw usually them in the would see them usually in the morning. That is bodies of people who had gone through the channel of civil justice and had not been attended to or channeled to to where they should have been sent to. And well, we saw that this was a problem. So of course, this is a matter of municipal improvement, but also at a larger scale. So we found what we had to renovate. First off, the Article 187 of the Penal Code said that the public defender's office could reach agreements in misdemeanors or in patrimonial crimes that are usually, small claims that have to do sometimes with a fee or sometimes with a transit incident that would take time off that is precious off of the defender's office. So, but these are aspects that probably civil justice could not attend to. And of course, these have to do as well with violence. So, in this sense, the public attorney general's office would dedicate over 80% of their time to attend to the needs of these problems and not the larger ones. So here you can see a small comparative image based on the polls that we conducted and other documents for justice. And we can see that out of the 33 million crimes committed in Mexico, about 3 million of them are laid claimed on, and only 1 million of them are truly investigated. But the important aspect here is that the General Attorney's Office only solves 237,000 of these compared to the 25,000 sentences that reach a trial. We can say without a question that the General Attorney's Office is a great judge of this country, and that means that society, however, no longer wants these offices to be the judges. They want to be only administrative, and that the tool for civic justice will not only attend to these 237,000, but many other misdemeanors or administrative crimes, if you will, that need to be attended to. So we have realized that civil justice does work in restorative justice, and they do work for both the public at large and police departments. But we also realize that the great civic judge is the general attorney's office, and society no longer wants that. So we have to provide the general attorney's office only an investigation for the larger crimes and not the small claims. So in this sense, it is important to take a next step. We have reached the limit of time. So this is my last image. I just want to say quickly that we have to make our civil justice systems and departments evolve. We have an initiative that has been prepared, and hopefully we have the conditions so that we can push it, so that we can reach centers like justice centers like they have in New York or in the UK, so that these civil claims centers can truly attend to the needs of communities, and so that the state general attorney's office can attend to the needs of more impactful crimes. Thank you, Bernardo, for your intervention. I believe it was very clear to us that, and I believe there's a consensus on this as to, for those of us who come to these types of forums, that penal justice has its limits, its limitations, and that are very clear in terms of solving problems, and that civil justice can help societies and cities in solving conflict in a more streamlined manner and more fruitful manner, even in some cases, that through resources like a therapeutic attention, for instance, and that it is still a system that coexists and that should be linked in a way with the penal justice system. Now, Violeta Maltos, who is the general director of the International Institute of Restorative Justice and Law. Violeta, I would like to know if you know something about restorative justice in Mexico compared to what we should know, what should we offer to the populace in terms of services. For restorative justice, maybe we know even less than regular justice systems. So, in broader terms, please talk to us about your experience, and if it is correct to say that restorative justice is a mechanism that could help us in building fairer cities and societies. This has nothing to do with actual security, but with building a fairer society. Thank you, Lilian. And thank you, Edna, and Mexico Evalua team, who I admire very much. Thank you for not only giving me this opportunity, but for considering restorative justice in such an important forum. And dear friends and colleagues at the panel, well, regarding restorative justice, we don't know a lot. We don't have a lot of information because there's a lot of regulation for penal justice and juvenile justice. There's a lot of regulation in that, and restorative justice as well. But the problem is that we have put a lot of effort in implementing that, but we have yet to achieve it. We've made a lot of effort in implementing solutions to the penal system, to the juvenile penal system, and execution of sentences. But that has created something. In 2008, we found that the majority of the cases in which we had a first intervention from the police or from a municipal force, and they could have offered a service like this one in time, we would not attend to these homicides or these maybe lesions or any type of bodily harm that come to people in terms of a crime that was committed against them. So what exactly is restorative justice? Well, there are different instruments that come from the UN for restorative justice, and has conceptualized it as a paradigm of justice that not only opposes the punitive system per se, but it has different ways in which it can things can be solved instead of being based in actual punishment, which is what our systems are based on. Not only justice, but also rules in your own house, in communities and schools. Instead of basing that on punishing, finding who the culpable was and punishing them. If you have a person who committed a misdemeanor, you take off their plates and you put them in jail. But however, for restorative justice is needs. That is the most important aspect. That is finding the people that need this type of justice that no longer have to do with actual encounters against the one party or the other, which is an important part of restorative justice, because people usually think that, well, you're going to confront one people with the other in order to reach an agreement, and that is not the case. This is the least restorative thing that you can do in some cases. So we have to identify who are the people that are involved in a particular misdemeanor, what type of institutions of the state are not doing the job they're supposed to be doing, and that are indirectly or sometimes directly provoking these types of conflicts or affectations or problems. So in this very first mapping of sorts, you have to identify how the persons were affected by this misdemeanor, what necessities or urgencies have to be met, or and were attacked in this particular uh, problem. And I believe that initiative that has been presented should take hold. And but you also have to assume who has to be accountable, has to be held accountable, not so that they can be giving the label of being a thief or a bad neighbor, like most punishing systems do, but to identify the causes and tackle those directly. And what Bernardo said was very significant, because this foundation that Renace does, this psychological help that they provide, is linked to restoration, because they identify the causes of the offense so that they can tackle it directly. It has to do with mental health. It has to do with the social constructs that we have for men and women, especially when they would derive in violence when, let's say, a woman would go out of their way to do things, which is wrong, of course. So, and we also have codependence of people and addictions as well, or whether you identify if it is a psychological issue or maybe the lack of employment. So what they would do is they would try to solve the causes. So when it comes to restorative justice, it implies everything, a wide scope, a wide array of approachments that identify the offense and the crimes, and identify, however, also the needs and the things that force them to commit a crime and attend those things. So we have two lines of work that we can tackle directly. That one has to do with civil justice, and the other has to do with any space of human interaction. Schools, churches, the whole household, and the other aspect has to do with the universe of contact with other people. That is, I have yet to see somebody that has implemented these two aspects at 100%, but at least in tips and bits, and a few experiences that we have achieved from that. Now, first off, one, the decision-making process that is focused on restorative issues, that is, it should lead to a civil judge. And this decision that should be taken has to do with perspective of gender, focus on transversal human rights, and identifying all these aspects and these needs and causes, and finding a way in which we can attend to the needs to and channel them to proper means of justice. And also the restorative process per se, or a conflict resolution through conciliation, mediation, that are not restorative, but they have their own measures and methods and solutions. And through these processes, whether we involve both parties directly, or sometimes there are methods in which you can involve even the families. There are methods in which, other than people and families and neighbors and schoolmates or organizations from civil society, you can have institutions from the state that can become involved, even though the state is a little bit sneaky in being held accountable and actually taking a seat. I'll give you an example. You can have a neighbor and that you have conflict maybe for the trash bin collection, or things. Maybe they let their trash outside and they usually leave them out for days, but nobody goes and tells that the municipal service for waste collection has yet to pass for over a month. So these are the types of problems that maybe a neighbor or other neighbor can go and go into a particular institute in the area of the municipality or the public institutions that are necessary, so that you can have the people there sitting and people from civil society that actually have the expertise to provide us with help with their knowledge and know-how, and sometimes with the implementation of programs that can generate programs of dialogue and attention to the needs of the people that actually might need them. So I still have 3 minutes. So there are many ways in which you can do this. And what does it have to do with civic justice? One of the components of civic justice, even though maybe Hernando can correct me because he's the expert, but it has to do mostly with solution of conflict. In this model, this is a very important component of it, not only because we have to innovate, but also because it is necessary in the end. We can channel people so that they can have better services, but if we do not establish spaces of communication or spaces of responsibility, and if we do not think of restorative processes in such a way that they are pedagogical in nature, if we not modulate communication, model it in such a way that we can change our even community spaces, we will continue to have even more saturation in our penal systems, regardless of the reforms we implement. So, way in which we can teach people to communicate with one another and to avoid labeling people, to treat people with respect, to generate empathy, and to be held accountable, not from the point of view of being a bad person, of who actually is guilty, or that they should be excluded or ostracized, but finding a way and amending ways so that they can know that their decision that they made affected other people and find solutions from that decision. But we do not have to relegate or stigmatize people. This is what restorative justice is aiming at, applying it in such a way that it can be restorative, so that the decision of a civic judge that sees people and the consequences and causes and in function of that they resolve, or maybe it can be a process of approaching one people or other through a facilitator, for instance, that has the training and the profile for that, so that they can apply different methods of justice. So the possibilities are have yet to be explored entirely. Morelia is one of these forefronts in this type of exploration, and thank you to Bernardo because he opened up the doors for Europe at the time, and we managed to have this know-how or knowledge shared to us, because we think that maybe people would actually look for only revenge, or we judge people, we have our prejudices with people, and you might end up ostracizing a person that that made the wrong decision. So these spaces of approaching a point, from a place of empathy, because there are many vehicles for restorative justice. There are even many ways in which you can attend to the needs of through partial interventions or individualized. And sometimes we think that, well, this happened to a police officer in Morelia, maybe this can apply to other one. That is not the case. Actually, there was a neighbor that was usually the victim of theft. At the end of one of her conferences, one of the people there showed a few pictures of what happened to her apartment. She told us that everything had been stolen from them, and she had a few neighbors that had been stolen from, and others that hadn't been, and problems with even other neighbors. But there was no way in which the police department from Morelia would attend to the needs, because they only thought that it had to go with the general attorney's office directly. So if we as a police officer couldn't catch them, well, nothing to happen to them, and then the general attorney's office would take the case and prosecute them. So how could we attend to the needs of people who have been affected if we don't have the police in the forefront? You can, of course, approach them, and there are methods to do that. There are civic methods to do that. Maybe a space in which people can talk and maybe blow off some steam and obtain information from the police departments, and them themselves can obtain information from the victims, so they can create databases that can be trustworthy, that would end up in the arrest of a person or an investigation. And they can also have this approaching to people, create this empathy with the places that have these problems, so that we can find solutions jointly through the municipality and the police department, so that we can work together. I believe that I already used my time, and the time's up. I hope I was clear enough, because that is a rather ample universe that is a kind of complicated. Thank you, Violeta. And our third panelist, Antoine Brosier. I believe that in his presentation, he points out something rather important, which we from our directorial offices appreciate. The offices from Brosier offer mediation and support in solving conflicts that can be personal, of course, but also things that are larger in scope. So I would like to hear from you, how do you translate restorative justice and mediation in the context of from which your own organization operates?
Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning for some of you. I want to thank you for the invitation, and I want to first to introduce the Waage in Hanover. Basically, I will switch to English because I hear the Spanish version right now. Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, we deal with the Waage in Hanover. We deal with more or less 500 mediation yearly in the area of so-called victim offenders mediation. All for that is in the domestic violence area, and some of them is what we call the restorative justice. The first question about what is the complementation of restorative justice or mediation with the justice system? I would say that the justice is not really here to solve the conflict, or it's not really here to enable the victim to explain the pain that it has, or for the offender to take the responsibility of the act. That means the justice is mostly here to say, okay, you are guilty or you are not guilty. To have a judgment to say you will be punished or you will be not punished. To say you will have to pay a reparation or you have no to pay any reparation to the victim. So, and it's only part of the system, let's say, and it is important. It is why we are dealing with mediation in Hanover. We see that as a good complement to the justice and to a good help to enable a conflict resolution. So mediation, for some of you, perhaps who don't really know how it works, is a very structured process. That means, first of all, you have the victim and the offender together in a room. We start always with the victim. First, we ask the victim wants to have a mediation. After that, if the victim wants to have it, we speak with the offenders, and we have another separate discussion with the offender to prepare for the mediation. And then we put both of them in the room and we start with the mediation. We compile the topics, we compile all of the issues that the victims may want to address to the offender. And then we deep into the conflict with each of the topics that they want to deal with. After that, we make, for each of the conflict position, we make an agreement. At the end of the day, we make a global agreement about the victim offenders mediation. I would say the big advantage of the mediation, in addition to the justice, or instead of the justice action, is sustainability. If I may want to resume the mediation in victim offender area, I will say sustainability is really the key topic, the key point. It means you have a solution between victim and offenders for the conflict and the act that they have, which is they work it out together. It enables to the victim to clarify, to make clear to the offenders, what did you do to me? Which pain did I get? When you attacked me, perhaps, what was the feeling that I had? So it enables for the victim to address to the offender all of the type of issues and suffering that the victim had in the context, and it enables again the offender from this part to take the full responsibility and to take the full to be capable to recognize
the impact of his action, and then together to find how can we, victim and offender, together find a way out of this conflict. How can we avoid this conflict to come back again? How can we make sure that we have a sustainable, agreed way out of this conflict? And it helps a lot, in addition to the justice, to avoid that after some times you again find the same conflict between the same victim and the same offender. So it's a very sustainable way of addressing the issue. Working with the justice on that, and it is what we do, it enables to relieve the justice, because we avoid again the same conflict to come again and again, and it avoids to have some case coming back to the justice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. In addition, and it is really key, it enables the victim to explain her feelings, to make sure and to explain to the offender the impact that they had, and it enables both parties to agree on reparation for both of them. So it is mostly what I would say the victim-offender mediation. And then if I go to restorative justice, it is victim-offender mediation plus the community. I have no nice presentation, but perhaps you can find that. You can read it. It is the mediation, the classical mediation in victim-offender mediation is you have an offender, you have a victim, you sit together, you make the mediation, and you find some sustainable way out of this conflict. If you go to the restorative justice, in addition to that, you have the community. You have the family, you have the friends, and all of the people involved in the conflict, but people who are not directly the victim or the offender. That means we enlarge the situation, and we enlarge the issue and the conflict resolution, not only victim offender, but as well with the community. If I may, I would like to give you 2 examples of projects that we do. One is very nice to speak about. It is about football. So, I don't know, I suppose in each of the countries in the world, you have the same issue. Every weekend, you hear about conflict on a football, on a soccer place, with or the attack of the referee, or attack between 2 teams in the football area, or even the public running into the game place to beat all of the people, etc. So, and we have it in Germany as well. So that means every weekend in Germany, in our region, we have at least 1 or 2 cases of football games which came into a big battle or a fight between the people. So what happens that in such case you stop the game, and in such case after the game you have a court, a so-called sport court in Germany, which is dealing with the 2 parties. And it is always the same. The court said it is like the justice. You did it bad. You attack the other one. You will have no possibility anymore to play for the next 10 games in your team, etc. So you have a judgment. What we do as a VAG in Hanover, in addition to that, we offer and propose a mediation, restorative justice mediation. That means we sit together with a few persons from one team and the other person of the other teams, depending of if it was 2 teams, if it is a referee with the referee and the team or some players, if public people came into the game to fight each other or to aggress people or players, they sit with us as well. And then we try to find a sustainable way together how to get out of the conflict. Because in a soccer game, normally a few months later, the same teams will play against. And most of the case, the players of the teams are living in the same city. So if you don't address the conflict, if you just do a judgment, you were good, you were bad, you have to pay that or whatever, you don't solve the problem of the conflict. And in the next game, you will have again the same situation. So it is what we do, that we sit together, and with both parties or different parties, we try to find a way out of the conflict. For an example, it could be a reparation of the conflict. It could be, we discuss how to avoid a new escalation, how to prevent for the next time, for the next game, something to happen like that. And we clarify the responsibilities. And for example, we had a situation, a restorative justice mediation after a game where two teams fight each other's. You had in the public some children of the players who were absolutely afraid about what their father did on the game's place. And at the end of the day, both teams agreed that they will have a new game, a friendly game. They mix the teams. That means some people of the team A come into the team B, some of the team B in the team A. Some children were always on the place to play together, and they made a game to show to the children and to the community that they were able to have a fair game together without any attack on the fight on the place. So, and it is what you reach with restorative justice or with mediation in victim offender mediation. It is that you manage to get a sustainable solution. You manage to get out of the conflict and to avoid that the conflict is coming back again. Lilian, I don't know how many time I have, but I have another example, but it could be for later if you wish.
Muchas gracias, Antoine.
Thank you, Antoine. And from this intervention, there is much that we have learned and gleaned. For example, how this type of tool can adapt to resolve conflicts, the common ones and those that affect each one of the cities. Could be in some city every weekend that there are football conflicts. And so I think this is something that's going to have to be dynamic and not something fixed. And we heard Antoine talk about mediations in domestic violence cases too, something that in Mexico is unthinkable. And perhaps it is something that we could innovate when we start asking ourselves if we should not perhaps ask ourselves the questions of why we consider this a crime that is not for mediation. So in the next interventions, perhaps we could touch on these topics. We're in a forum on innovation and justice. And I would like to ask Bernardo at this second round, which is even shorter, it's a 5-minute round, to talk about very specific topics on how we have come full circle with innovation and sometimes political considerations, not just in Mexico, are very weighty. And problems in impunity and high levels of dissatisfaction on behalf of citizens regarding the justice system. And so sometimes it's hard to promote these systems. Bernardo, what do you think in 5 minutes are the key aspects so that in the city of Morelia, you are able to drive forward with civic justice? Look, what I might say here is what you just said is quite true. The problems are real. Family violence is real. Community problems are real. In effect, all of this is transpiring. It's happening. On the other side, the capacity of the system to respond to these problems and to try to ensure that they don't become more serious. In the case of Morelia, at least as concerns the restorative and civic justice processes, there are others, not just Morelia, But what we have seen is that the legal system, the legal apparatus, does generate restrictions regarding the evolution of restorative justice and civic processes. For example, in Morelia, what we did was find a route. Violeta came, she worked with the police, and they were able to resolve a huge number of problems, deaths and fights and rent and family violence and more. But then they started to settle murder, problems of murder, not with the victim, of course, but with studying the root causes of these murders. And almost 100% of the people, and we studied 140 murders, were people that had been through civil justice, and we had been unable to generate restorative processes prior to their being murdered, or generate the right kind of therapy, or do something to help these people. The most serious one we faced was when a woman was murdered, and it's truly paradigmatic. A woman who came to the police in Morelia 3 different times and sought service. We were able to provide service, but we had to take her to the public defender precisely because of what you just mentioned, that it is not something that we can mediate on, and the civil justice doesn't deal with it. They did not take care of her at the public defenders, and one day we had to go and pick up her body. She was killed with a machete by her own husband in front of their children. So the issue at stake here is a great number of issues can be settled and resolved. Yes, they can, in such a way that you can note where the problem is stemming from, why there are people who are aggressive, what is the mechanism and the background that leads to murder. It's very rare to find a case without some background. So, in the case of Morelia and in Escobedo, Mexicali, Colima, these other cities where these processes are underway as well, it works from the standpoint of traffic problems, from the standpoint of administrative sanctions. But I do believe, and I would reiterate this, that the legal framework is hindering us. We have found ourselves at a bottleneck here, and that is the possibility of a public defender without a judicial sanction of any kind take care of these processes and generate reparations and make it mandatory. Then on the other hand, the capacity, the ability of the public defender that should be used for other cases are used 85% in of the personnel at these offices are working on these, and there are heinous cases, very serious ones. So I would ask how it is that all of these municipalities that are generating civil and restorative processes, how all of these police that carry out these restorative processes might have the legal capacity to do so with greater strength. I do believe that we need to make adjustments in our legislation so that we can grant legal security to people, and on the other hand, realize that a good part of the problem of security, safety in Mexico begins because at the municipal levels, we are not sufficiently taking care of people with restorative processes and grappling with family violence and other processes that are generated, the sale and consumption of drugs, which is of the most frequency, but there are other crimes and problems as well. In this regard, note that once the authority handles the case, settles it, then there are processes of governance that come into play where the municipalities not only manage the conflict, but they govern and resolve the conflict. That's when you see the statistics with the line heading downwards in murders and without necessarily the criminal justice system having to come into play for these more serious crimes. Thank you, Bernardo. Violeta, I would ask the same question of you in your experience. What has had to be changed? What type of movement have you had to do, or arguments have you had to put forth? How do you convince an authority to incorporate a politician or to incorporate restorative justice as a solution? How do you achieve this progress in innovation in your experience? This process is not just one of one side or one person. It's a set of issues here. Civil society organizations, starting with the penal justice restorative system, there was a handful of people who worked and achieved the changing system and convincing the government, but the arguments that are of the greatest impact is that of cost. We believe that there is a great number of costs to implement it, but the truth of the matter is that at the municipal level, I don't know of anyone who has had to do this, but Mexico now evaluates, as we heard a moment ago, the costs of carrying out a process to make a difference with what Antoine said, but the situation here is somewhat different. But the costs of carrying out a process for a dispute settlement or restorative processes, the difference is from 1,500 pesos up to 30,000 pesos, or how to determine that an alternate solution might be used before going into a legal expense of up to 15,000 pesos, rather than just the 1,500 pesos that a restorative process might cost. Bernardo, who lived in Morelia, who lives there, saw it come down, the index. And he said something very interesting regarding the perception of conflict. The statistics have shown, and he knows that this is clear in Morelia, from being in the first place in disputes between in society, and not just civil and restorative justice, but also these processes are great, but if the entire apparatus that we can channel people to handle their needs and understand the causes, underlying causes, the process is very good, but it falls short. The same with civil justice, and we heard this a while ago. Without the support of restorative processes, that would be like involving people, but not making them or us responsible for resolving their issues. So it would have to be jointly. Now, regarding the costs, I mentioned this first. Secondly, we want to avoid escalation in the conflict. And not just what they did in Morelia, they dropped the perception 26%. I forget the exact figure, but Bernardo, but the different quarters measured by the National Institute of Statistics, INEGI, not just reducing the scale of conflict, but reducing the cost and reducing the negative perception that citizens hold their police forces in. My first two professors in restorative justice were police. One was British and the other was Australian. But here our perception of the police is very different, and that's regrettable. Because in order to reduce escalation of violence, the response would have to be municipal, and it would have to lie in the hands of police. So we need to change that mindset, that perception. I think that those are benefits that we can find through applying restorative justice. It's a matter of culture as well, and not just something that can be done from one moment or 1 year to the next, or from one political administration to the next. This demands continuity, and that is one of the problems that you can start implementing, but if the next presidential or municipal administration doesn't follow through, then the work is cut short. And I don't know if I answered your question, but this is an endeavor, not just of one person. These are my main arguments. It has to be joint between civil society. What happened in Morelia when Bernardo left, it was civil society. It was a business cupola that demanded that we not let that new process fall by the wayside, but proper continuity. And so it's an effort between government and citizens become involved in restorative processes, not just through mediation, but the statute or the bylaw of the European Union, as it is regulated in the standardized model that we have here, is not just exactly that, but we have two people who have co-built a conflict. We sit them down, both of them share responsibility, and they work on reparation mutually. At least in the clear model of the European Union, we have the offender, one person, being responsible for harm or damage caused to another. And I hope that I can touch on the last one. What about family violence? Family violence, at least as it is typified in our law, not only has to do with gender issues. When it's not gender, then the prohibition of, it's not even established as a restorative process, but rather it doesn't seem to make sense because there is no danger. It's like any other conflict. But when there are gender reasons in place, then there are restorative processes. And there is the Center for Justice for Women in Hidalgo, and that has had 3 years. Mediation is prohibited by law. And but we are working in the best way possible. We're talking about possibility of risk. We're talking about cultural issues here that the victim and the family of the victim sometimes don't even, sometimes they justify these criminal actions. And it ends up like the case that Bernardo talked about, the murder of a woman who sought justice 3 times. We have to carry out an analysis from the very beginning to understand what is the proper restorative process to use. What are the first and most important conditions of safety for the victim? Because not all of the gender crimes are against women, but we need to ensure the victim that there will be peace of mind and that there is safety before sitting them down at the table and across from their aggressor, their attacker. They can go to victims assistance programs. There are restorative programs for those who generate violence as well. There are very many different ways of working. You can have cycles and circles with victims and their families. The cases are all tailored to each specific situation. The ideology here is different, but one case is not handled the same way as the next, although it might be similar to one that I saw yesterday. Each one is analyzed concretely and we generate interventions, and that is not always enough. But yes, you can carry out restorative actions as long as there is an understanding of what is at stake and what the issue in truth is. Thank you very much, Lilian. Fortunately, your answers and those from Bernardo as well answer to the questions from the audience. And Antoine, we would like to hear from you, your closing round here. And this is the question that is arising from the audience, and we would like to hear in your audience, in your voice, Antoine, what are the mediation issues that you face in the context in which you implement this type of mediation? When are there cases that can no longer be handled through mediation but have to go through to criminal justice? When is mediation no longer possible? And with this, Antoine, we would close with about 2 minutes. I'm sorry, it's a very important question. We have very little time left, Antoine.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure I understood really all of the question, but if I may first comment on Bernardo and Violeta intervention. The issue that you have is that the police and the justice in Germany and everywhere, they have no possibility really to be active before the crime is occurred. That means in this context, it is where you need the prevention, and you get that with restorative justice. I will say as well that restorative justice or mediation is a way of reduce the cost for the justice, because after you have a mediation and after you come to a sustainable solution via the mediation, you avoid the crime to come back again. And what happens in Germany, every fourth of the women is victim of domestic violence. If you are able to intervene first before the final crime occurs, means before the woman is killed by a man or person living with her, you avoid, of course, a lot of cost, and you avoid the crime to take place. And it is why it is so important not to have only the police and the justice, but to have as well the way of mediation. What we do with the VAGE as well, we train the police, we train some jail and prison employees in order to enable them to have the focus on the victim, and in order to prepare as well for the prisoner when they come back into the society. They are able to have some mediation with the victim, so that you avoid that they come back into this schema of conflict and of violence. I don't know if it is really the response to your questions, but I did not really hear perfectly the question.
Sí, entonces creo que, o sea, en tu experiencia...
In your experience, then, there's mediation, or these processes, they include, or they're carried out before the crime is committed. But the question that is open, and there are several questions that the audience has, and I think that I will be able to send them to you as speakers for subsequent study. But once the crime has been committed, can you carry out a mediation process when domestic violence crime has taken place?
Part of the process as well. If you have already after the crime you are able to deal with the mediation, to enable the victim to work on that, to make sure that the offenders take the responsibility of the crime, and to make sure that you find a sustainable way out of this conflict, and enable the person to meet again, perhaps without coming back into this situation. So does that mean, yes, the mediation, even after a crime, is enable you to find a way out of the conflict, out of the situation between the two parties, and to find a way which is enabling people to live together again.
Muchas gracias, Antoine. Y pues se nos ha acabado el tiempo.
Thank you, Antoine, and we have now run out of time. And for those who have submitted questions in writing, we will make sure that we send them to you.
If somebody has other questions, you can give the person my emails, and I'm happy to go into contact with the person.
Okay.
Very well. Thank you so much for that. And I thank you all for your kind attention. And we are now closing this Civil and Restorative Justice panel. Thank you all.